Hey everyone, welcome to episode 4 of the Jasmine Ortiz Show. This week is our Coachella episode because it is officially Coachella season. We are going to be discussing a little bit of what's going on at Coachella, the performances that we're seeing, as well as other current events happening around the Miami-Dade area. I'm back again with our lovely co-host, Jordi Polycarp,
Hi.
and we're going to go straight into it. So, this year's Coachella has seemingly been one of the better ones in recent years. I mean, to me, I always compare it back to the OG 2016, 2017 Coachellas when we were in high school, envious of everyone that got to go. Kind of what my outfit is inspired by today, 2016 Coachella. But I know, Jordi, you had some insight regarding the different setups that we had with certain performers, the outfits, the choreography.
Yeah, I think it's definitely been interesting to watch so far because I think that from what I'm seeing, I always think like if Vanessa Hudgens isn't there, then maybe this year wasn't as good. Obviously she's pregnant right now, but I realized that she was not there and I was like, well, we can't have Coachella without Vanessa Hudgens. But I think that from what I've seen, a lot of the crowds for certain performers look very low energy and like they don't know any of the music, which has been really interesting to see. I feel like that's been a really big part of the like TikTok era of people discovering artists, and like the diehard fans of certain artists are getting older, and the younger fans are usually the ones who end up being more diehard, more like fanatic about them. And so certain sets just looked kind of dead because their fans either don't go to Coachella or already saw them on tour at some point during this year, like Sabrina Carpenter, Renee Rapp. Like Renee Rapp ended up bringing Kesha on stage, which we can talk about a little bit after that, which was a really interesting thing to see. But I do feel like so far from what I've seen of the live sets and what I've been hearing about their crowds, a lot of the bigger artists of color did amazing this year. Their fans loved their sets. And also, depending on the stages that they were on, they had these huge, really interesting, versatile looking sets that they used all of. So they really put on a really amazing show. In particular, Tyler the Creator did an amazing job. If anybody saw him like fly out like fly out and fully break through his set
I loved it.
and then
I loved
also
it.
walk up the wall of it vertically, that was amazing. And also Tyler always puts on a good show. And then Doja Cat also was really interesting to watch, especially with like
Yeah.
she shaved her head, everyone thinks she's in the Illuminati.
I like that that was her playful way of hitting back at the haters. Like, you want hair? I'll give you hair.
Right, those little
But
like
it's
hair
like
monsters,
all over.
crazy.
I was like, no way. Because I saw brief images of it and I saw that she was wearing this like long blonde wig.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also saw that her shirt and her pants were also wearing long blonde wig.
Yeah.
I was like, this is amazing.
I think it's
So I immediately caught the reference of like, I'm bald, get over it.
I think it's definitely, I think in particularly with the blonde and the length was supposed to go back to her like Say So era, when like that was the main thing people were hearing from her on TikTok, and fans liked that version of her. But people who found her from before that know that she's always been like weird and a little dark and like a little scary but like still cute. And I think Say So was just
Yeah.
too far into the like pure pop side, and that's not what she wants to do. Like it was just a one-off.
Yeah.
And so I think she was kind of trying to say like, that's not who I am. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it, but like I'm gonna do what I want. Like if you want hair, it's gonna be all over the stage. Yeah.
I'm happy that she's able to really explore other sides of her artistry, or I guess her true voice as an artist, because you know, you kind of have to do something to break out into the mainstream, right? And if Say So and all of that pop kind of mainstream music that she made, that was amazing, really was able to catapult her there in order to do what she's truly passionate about, I think that was a success. I see the same sort of thing with how Lady Gaga pivoted from that like kind of gritty dance pop of the 2010s into her jazz album with Tony Bennett, into Joanne, where she's doing this sort of country pop album, and even Beyonce with her new album venturing into country pop. It's like this whole transformation that artists are allowed to have when they've made it in the mainstream, when they know they have a fan base that will buy what they're selling. So I think it's cool. I loved it. Another thing, going back to the Kesha and Renee Rapp performance. So, first of all, I want to say Kesha is queen.
Always
I
has been.
adore her.
Always will be.
The song TikTok was literally embedded in my brain in 2008 and has never left. I know every single word.
Mhm.
And when the app TikTok came out, I was like, Kesha predicted it. Kesha created it. It was all her. But of course, the opening line to this song has now become somewhat controversial. Wake up in the morning feeling like P. Diddy. ... That did not age well. But aside from discussing that, in this performance, Renee brought Kesha out, and the first thing she says is, wake up in the morning saying P. Diddy. Blank P. Diddy. And it's like, you know what? That was the best way to reclaim that song. That was the best way to put that lyric on its head and still enjoy the music. So I thought that was iconic, and I love the nostalgia element of that, and No Doubt also performing at Coachella. And I watched that live on a stream, and it was incredible. Gwen Stefani has not aged a day. She looks exactly like she did the last time they performed. And she is just so talented and incredible.
So I think it was interesting seeing the juxtaposition between No Doubt's set and Blur, especially because they were popular around the same time. And like I feel like Blur is a pretty well-known name for like contemporary rock music for like 2000s and things like that, where No Doubt's set was really great and people were excited to see them, and No Doubt's always been iconic. Gwen Stefani has always been iconic. But I think that from what I understand and what I would expect, I don't think Blur fans go to Coachella.
Probably not.
I wouldn't think so, right?
No.
And I think especially Coachella is such a hub for
influencer
content. Yeah, it's the influencer.
It's
desert.
the influencer games. That's what it is.
Yeah,
it's the Olympics
influencer
of
city. And I don't think they care about Blur. I wouldn't expect them to. But it sucks because then, like, watching the video back, it's just their lead singer being like, sing along, please. Like, you know the words. And it's silent. And I just think, I don't think their fan base was there.
So when you're in that stage of like 20 years post peak of your career, you need to pull the fans that you have. And you need to cater to that very specific audience of diehard fans. So I think that just didn't happen here, and they were probably offered a spot, excited about being in a big festival like Coachella, and then just kind of failed to connect the dots on that.
Unfortunately.
So that's a little bit soul-crushing, but hopefully they had a good time anyway. So I wanted to talk about something else that is very Miami-focused as far as current events go. Last week, the Rickenbacker Causeway caused a lot of havoc, specifically with an FDOT project that is being rolled out over the next 2 months, wherein on a Sunday at 4 p.m., they decided to completely cut off any transportation between Key Biscayne and the mainland. What the result of this was is that, of course, people on the weekends, Saturday, Sunday, go to the beach on Key Biscayne, Crandon Park, build bags to see the lighthouse or the state park. I mean, there are a million things to do out in Key Biscayne, even if you're not a resident of the island. But there was no warning whatsoever for cars driving in and out of Bill Baggs Park or even onto the causeway that there would be a closure at 4 o'clock. Otherwise, I'm sure the thousands of families that were stranded with young kids or elderly people or just themselves with no food, no water, no restroom for upwards of 5 to 6 hours, I'm sure they would have turned right around. I personally think I would have had a mental breakdown had I been on Key Biscayne that day, because Jordi, you've seen me drive in like normal Miami traffic.
Yes.
I lose my mind having to sit there without moving at all and no way out, nowhere to even like move around traffic to see what's happening. Like that would actually drive me insane. So I'm reading an article in the Miami Herald right now So on Tuesday morning, the Florida Department of Transportation reopened the southbound exit ramp onto US 1, leaving Key Biscayne, the last remaining road closure, and opened the northbound flyover lane that connects I-95 north into the causeway. So luckily, this has been remedied, but it really leads into another conversation altogether about the poor city planning in Miami. I adore the city. I love living here, but it's really car centric. And this just goes to show that if something were to happen like this again, people are completely stranded in the dark with no information and no way to get out without a car. So I know in New York, the public transit system is very extensive. It reaches even far points of Queens and the Bronx that you can easily get to from anywhere in Manhattan, anywhere in Brooklyn. People will complain about an hour and a half train ride, but at least you're not sitting in 3 hours of traffic.
Exactly. I think Miami definitely deserves much better like metro infrastructure when it comes to that. Because for us, I mean, like we have our own problems with public transit, but more in terms of the mayor sending thousands upon thousands of cops, more of them, into the streets of the city and on public transit. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like you guys deserve to have more options to get around and affordable options as well, and they should sue because like that could have been so potentially dangerous, and maybe was, but you guys definitely deserve to have a better metro system. I think for us it becomes a whole thing because there's so many people using it, and fare evasion is like kind of what everybody's doing at the moment.
Like hopping
Because
for context, hopping the turnstiles and not
yes,
paying through Omni for the train.
yes, hopping the turnstiles because they had raised the price. I think sometime last year to
What is it
it's
now?
basically almost three. It's 290.
Oh my gosh. The last time I was in the
Yeah.
city, it was like 225, and that was still a little steep.
Yeah, it's 290 right now. And so it's taken to the point of people are smashing the Omni card readers and like taping over the actual where you could slide your card. Everyone's like, it's been a really interesting community thing to see. Everyone's leaving the door open for everybody. Like if you swipe at least, or if there's a place where you can swipe, if you have to, you open the door and let everybody else in.
Mm-hmm.
And then but also in those places there are so many cops and cameras. They're arresting teenagers for hopping the turnstiles.
When that's something
They're
that's been happening the past 50 years.
but at least it makes it a little bit, I mean, it makes it way easier to get around. And they're always trying to like fix them and add to the infrastructure, and the people who work in the subways deserve to be paid.
Do you think the solution to this, and this goes back to my point about Miami, would just be to provide free public transit? Because in my mind, public transit is a human right. Because to be able to go from point A to point B, whether that's for business, for pleasure, for community building, to exercise, to buy groceries, you should be able to do that without having to invest tens of thousands of dollars into a vehicle.
Mhm.
The fact that the US is so spread out, there's the argument of, well, like we have more land than Europe, we have more land than other countries, like we can't have a complex rail system. That is patently false, because here comes my San Diego Model Railroad Museum mug. I have a weird, like, fascination, niche interest in trains and public transit. Historically, the thing that connected us coast to coast was the railway. And the thing that specifically developed South Florida was Henry Flagler's Railway from northern Florida all the way down to the Keys. Before that, there would have been zero chance of anyone in the north experiencing Florida and wanting to invest in it. People and governments are actively being controlled by lobbyists from the car industry. And that is a problem because it actively disenfranchises people of color, people in underdeveloped communities, and increases the likelihood of food deserts, which are a huge problem, again, in underserved communities, So essentially, a food desert is an area that has limited access to affordable and nutritious food. In contrast, an area with greater access to supermarkets and vegetables may be called a food oasis. This also contributes to the distance for someone to walk or be able to take transit to a supermarket. What I mean to say by this is I want Miami to become a city that moving into the future provides access to neighborhoods like Miami Beach, Wynwood, Midtown, Mimo, all of those areas, and Key Biscayne with public transit and metro system, because without a metro, you are still contributing to massive traffic congestion on the highways with the bus system. The bus system is highly unreliable. It's dangerous because a lot of everyday civilians don't use it because of its unreliability, and it actively gets stuck in traffic. So what's the point? If you have a car, you're not going to choose to take the bus, just period. But if you have a car and you can walk or take the train and avoid traffic, that would change everything. So that's my hot take on public transit in Miami. I would like to go into a quick little break before our next segment. Hey guys, welcome back. We're going into our second segment where we are going to be discussing the topic of the week. Our topic this week was actually inspired by our lovely guests that you'll get to meet later on in the show, but we really want to talk about entrepreneurship and having multiple passions. This is something I know Jordi and I can both relate to because while we're pursuing our artistic careers as a business, this started out as our passion. So ultimately, there are other things that started out as passions that maybe we'll want to pursue later in life.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing being an artist because I feel like everyone always has multiple things that they're doing at once. And aside from being an independent artist and having to run your own business as a person and a brand, I think it also for so long music was a hobby for us, or at least while we went through, like, if you go through traditional schooling, music is a hobby, or at least for me it definitely was. And having to find time and make time outside of everything else that I was doing for my passions, now it is just what I'm doing. So I think it's an interesting thing of like finding other hobbies and like self-care in that kind of way when you want to be creative, but now your passion is directly related to your income. But I also think that for a lot of us, there's so many options for what you can do as a creative. And for a while, I think we start to feel pigeonholed with very specific things that we're doing and trying to stick with your plan A and put your all and your everything into it. But as Liana talks about later, diversifying and being versatile and using that to build your entrepreneurship, I think is a really important thing that every artist should be trying to do.
Absolutely. I know that growing up and even just going through college, I discovered that I had other passions that I kind of felt like I didn't know what to do with them. For example, I've always been really passionate about environmentalism. My parents have been involved in the green energy business since I was really young. So I know a lot about um, solar energy, wind, geothermal, how all of those things function, why they're beneficial, what the tax benefits are to corporations and businesses when they actually use those technologies. But how that interacts with the music industry is something that I'm very interested in, specifically in the touring space. So, something that I've always thought since I was younger, especially entering college, was how much waste touring produces. And since you can't really do anything about the planes or the buses that you're taking on tour with you, what you can change is how venues are providing electricity. If there was a push for music venues to be powered with solar, geothermal, or wind energy, we would cut back so much on the carbon emissions that are required to power a super huge arena, for example, like the Eras Tour requires. If you are taking all of those megawatt hours and removing them from the main power grid, actively powering them with a backup battery from a solar system, you could generally offset up to 90% or 100% of your electricity usage. So that's something that I'm passionate about speaking out about because it's so specific and really overlooked. A lot of times people don't think about ethical ramifications of touring, of even being in the business or industry that they're a part of. And the more that we hold venues and larger corporations responsible, the easier it will be on the consumer.
100%. And I'm really glad you brought that up because I feel like the way that the industry is moving right now, our generation is really trying to care about the planet and wants to be versatile because there's so many options for us nowadays. I think in terms of jobs and majors, the feeling of having to stick to one thing doesn't really exist anymore. And another thing Liana brings up later is how many times people change jobs or change industries in their lifetime as an adult. And I think if we all allowed ourselves to branch out in those ways, being able to connect the music industry and environmentalism and activism and finance and marketing, like, I think there are so many ways that all of these industries affect each other, and if we could just communicate a little bit more, or like have people who care about multiple of these things at once, I think it would make all of our lives a little bit better.
I also have a passion that's completely random, but speaking of entrepreneurship and multiple income streams, like we do later with Liana, I have a passion for interior design and decoration. I've always had this passion. I absolutely love curating a space to my own style, as well as to a certain era or vibe or style of architecture. So I've definitely have in my future the plan or idea to have my own interior design or interior decoration company, or maybe align with home goods or something like that, because I just think it would be so much fun to expand my brand into that space that I'm genuinely so happy being in.
I could totally see you doing that too. That's crazy.
Like the Martha Stewart of music. That's what I want to be.
I would love that. Also, I think people would love your stuff. Like, just from how, like, being Jasmine's friend and having seen her apartment and dorm rooms and the ways that they've been, so they're like little worlds. I would love for you to do that, please, actually.
Thank you. I'm gonna have to do a little apartment tour on the show at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that, and I think that and fashion design
Mhm.
is another element that I've always been so passionate about. There's kind of nothing besides music that I love more than putting together a good outfit. That gives me the ultimate satisfaction, dopamine rush. It just makes me feel like I'm creating something.
Mhm.
And as silly as that can sound, because clothing can be so innocuous, it's also your most outward expression of yourself to strangers.
100%. I also think that, especially for independent artists, for me in particular, trying to find my own style through like releasing new music and things like that and trying to really get down to who I am, I think that's a super important part of it. And Jazz, you've always been like such an inspiration in that way, because I feel like when you step into a room, you're always authentically yourself. Yeah. And I
Thank
really like,
you.
I love like, I always love seeing you in general, but also like just the way that you always present yourself is so cohesive and has been since I've known you, which is a really hard thing to do. And I think that artists should make it a point to follow in that direction as well. Because I think for a lot of us, trying to bridge the gap between the sound and the look is so important in your branding and putting all of that together. And it can be fun. Like, I feel like we forget that you can, like, even though you as an artist are a product, you're also a person with interests and like interesting hobbies, and like you're an intelligent woman as well. And I think that if more artists could try to put more of themselves into that and allow those kinds of like hobbies and things, like music doesn't have to be the be all end all of everything that we do, and it's not, because we're three-dimensional people. But I think that we should all be having a little bit more fun with the things that we're doing, you know?
That is so validating and sweet of you to say, because
You're welcome.
I feel like I'm a recovering people pleaser. So it genuinely means the world to me that you've perceived me in a way that is super authentic. I think because I've never felt the need to do that around you or around our friends,
Mhm.
because it feels like a safe space for me, that I have felt genuinely able to be myself 100% of the time.
Oh. It's because we're all insane, by the way.
That's because we're all crazy.
Because we're all
We
insane.
all.
And unfortunately, when we get together, we have no decorum.
But those are the best friendships, when you can just completely let loose, say your hot takes off camera. No one's judging you, you know?
Us in between takes.
All right. I love this. I love you so much. I love this conversation. I want to move into a quick little break before our next segment.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Jasmine Ortiz Show. We're about to go into my very favorite segment, our Uncut Diamonds. This is where we discuss up and coming artists, creatives, and entrepreneurs on their journey throughout the music industry. So today we have Liana Salinas, and I'm so excited to talk about her experience as an entrepreneur, as a music business professional, and as a creative musician herself. So welcome, Liana. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you. I've gotten to see the growth of your career through the ways in which we work together. And I'm just so impressed with your ambition and your drive. And so this is a whole new facet of you as an artist now embarking on this podcast journey. And I'm honored to be a part of it. So I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to come onto the show. We discussed a little bit off air about your life, about your experiences. I really just want everyone in the audience to learn a little bit more about who you are and how we met. So, where are you from, and what is your story with music?
So I'm originally from Miami. I love this city. I've been fortunate to travel to a lot of places, but I can't imagine living anywhere else. There's just such a unique culture here, and I have so many deep ties with the community and especially the music community, of course. So basically, my story is I had a bunch of amazing music teachers all the way from elementary school through college who were able to really listen to what my hopes and dreams were for my future. And they took me seriously and gave me a lot of opportunities that led to the career that I have today. So, beginning from my elementary school teacher, Ms. Busher, who saw that I loved to sing and play viola at the time I was playing a string instrument, all the way through my mentor at the Miami Children's Chorus, Mr. Tim Sharp. And I told him at 12 years old that I wanted to take his position as artistic director of this community choir. And he took me seriously. And he's like, okay, well, why don't you start mentoring the younger group? And do you want to conduct in this concert? And maybe you could be the teaching assistant for this other group. And over the years, that has led me to be that exact position, be the artistic director of the Miami Children's Chorus. In addition to that, I was a full-time middle and high school chorus teacher for 5 years, right after I graduated from the University of Miami, where I studied music education with a jazz emphasis, kind of a rare major, at least it was at the time. I was the only person in my class. And basically after that experience of teaching full-time in a school, as a lot of people unfortunately experience teaching full-time in our school system, they burn out. And that's what happened to me. I just went a little too hard in growing this program, and it was a thriving program. I had a lot of students, almost record numbers, I think, attend Allstate, and
Wow.
yeah, and I had multiple young arts winners every year, and the success was there for sure. But I was fried. I was completely
Yeah.
exhausting myself, falling asleep driving home. And yeah, it was just not good. So finally, that led me to make a decision to leave that school system. And out of that, I ended up birthing the first company that I started, which is My Music Match. And I'm sure you have lots of questions about it, but that's obviously how you and I know each other, Jasmine, because for those of you who don't know, in addition to being a fabulous musician herself, Jasmine is also a wonderful teacher. So through My Music Match, she's teaching lessons to aspiring young artists. And that's how we, full circle have gotten to this point. So I think that's a little bit about me to kick it off.
Absolutely. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction, Liana. I think you definitely gave a lot of background on why you're here, what led to you creating your company, My Music Match, and of course, how we met. I absolutely love teaching with My Music Match because I have had the experience to share the knowledge that I've curated over the course of my career, over the course of my education at U Miami as well. Go Canes. And I think the thing that I enjoy the most about working with you and your company is the fact that your students so specifically choose the skill sets that they want to work on. So, me as a teacher, what I love to share the most is recording, singing, songwriting, and vocal performance. So, all of those elements are things that with the match quiz, the entire premise of My Music Match, I'm able to share the skills that I want to share, and then the students are able to garner the skills that they want to learn. So I
You
love
couldn't have
that.
said it better. That's exactly the point. That's the philosophy. You know, we're all unique human beings and we have different dreams and aspirations, goals, and the right kind of mentor is going to ask what you want and then help guide you to achieve those dreams. And that's how we hire our teachers, you know, is understanding what areas of expertise you have, what your passions are, because that's what's going to light you up when you're teaching, and then also matching that with what the students' ambitions are and making sure that it really is a compatible relationship, because that student teacher, that mentorship relationship is really critical and can make or break what that younger person really wants to do and what the teacher's experience is too. So I'm so glad that you're having a good experience with us.
Absolutely. And I understand a bit about what you were saying regarding burnout, working in a brick and mortar school. Myself, I think last fall through the spring, I had the experience where I just didn't feel supported by the school I was working for. I felt like I was being asked to put in all these extra hours on weekends, on my personal time. And when I was in school, I wasn't allowed to be lesson planning, even when I had large blocks of empty time. So it just became this negative feedback loop of burnout, exhaustion, even at times resentment from like the establishment that I was a part of, because I wanted to give so much to these kids and they were the best students. I will never forget them. My first and only ever like full music class. I miss them all the time, but the environment was just very toxic. And unfortunately, that's the reality for so many educators when they're the backbone of our society. So thank you for putting in the time that you did. And I really hope that things continue to get better for educators in the future.
Me
Going
too.
from that point, yeah, absolutely. When you were still in college and you were studying music education, jazz performance, did you ever imagine putting on this entrepreneurship hat as well? And what would you tell your younger self if you could?
No, I did not have any inclination whatsoever to go into business. In fact, I was so hyper focused. Like I said before, I, at 12 years old, decided that I wanted to be the artistic director of the Miami Children's Chorus, and I'm literally doing that. That's so rare. And when
Yeah.
I entered college, I was surrounded by people who just were in complete contrast to my clarity, who were getting, a lot of them, education degrees just because that was like a good plan B instead of getting a performance degree. And I remember feeling like it was my personal secret mission to convince all of those imposters who were on the education track to abandon ship and to switch over to a different mission, you know, a different major, because I was like, you're not going to be a good teacher. You don't even want to teach. You're doing this just to make sure that you have a backup plan in case you don't make it as a performer, which is just not the right approach in my eyes. People really need to be passionate about what they're doing in general, like for your own happiness, not even for the students too, but for yourself.
Yeah.
And then for my own personal goals, it happened to be because I'm from Miami and I had really great relationships with my own mentors, like at the chorus. I also had a great relationship with two founders of the school that I ended up teaching at. And so they were essentially waiting for me to graduate in order to start teaching at that school, which is why I graduated in 3 years, and I started teaching at 21. Probably part of my burnout because I took like 16 classes a semester.
Oh my
Not even
gosh.
16 credits, 16 classes one semester.
Wow.
But so at the time,
Frost does that. Frost is like that.
I mean, I had to have special permission, and to their credit, they discouraged me from going so hard. But yeah, once I have an idea, it's like no one is going to pull me off the path. And to that point, I really had tunnel vision while I was in college because I just desperately wanted to get out of school and start working because I had this clarity of what I wanted to do. And in a way, I think that's a strength because I really plowed through and, I'm ahead in a lot of ways, jumping straight into the workforce. But on the flip side, I don't think that I was truly open minded during my schooling because I was really resentful about having to take certain courses that I didn't feel were in alignment with my ultimate goals. And while I think I was right about some of them, like, do I think I needed to learn how to play flute and trombone in my brass techniques class? No, I'm never going to teach those instruments ever. At the same time, I wish that I would have explored more of what possibly could have inspired or given me an idea about this entrepreneurial route. I don't think that that's presented to musicians as an option unless they've already signed up for like a music business track. That's kind of interesting to me because musicians and people who are in the gig economy in general, like any creative field, you often do have to wear all of those multiple hats and represent yourself, have an element of sales or media and marketing, be able to negotiate on your own behalf, even vet contracts properly. And those are standard business practices that no one teaches you. And then ultimately people get taken advantage of because the people who know are the ones finalizing the deals, and the people who are being represented are just kind of being swept up along in all of it. So if I had any advice for my younger self, it would be to find a better balance between my clear goals and working hard and going in a direction, which I do think is valuable. And a lot of people, I think, lingered a little too long in the figuring out phase. So yes, have your goals, but keep an open mind and try to find the balance between being an expert in something and also being well-rounded enough so that if you do decide to change course later, you're not kind of starting from scratch. Not everyone can learn from the school of hard knocks like I eventually, did. So, better to set yourself up with a well-rounded foundation if you can.
Absolutely. I loved your answer. I think it's really interesting, specifically what you said about entrepreneurship in the music department at Frost. That is something that has done a complete 180, I guess, since the time you were there. Now, at least in the contemporary department, I have zero knowledge of the jazz department, but the contemporary department where Jordi and I met, we were part of the MADE program, which is Modern Artist Development and Entrepreneurship. So specifically, this is a performance degree meant for artists to develop their stage presence, branding, marketability, songwriting skills, production techniques, while also honing in on the entrepreneurial music business side of it. So I chose to take a music business minor in conjunction with that major, but that was a very common track. And as well, I was able to curate different music production classes because I was actually an MPro major. So I was able to be a part of the umbrella of the MADE program while also being in the professional music degree. So I do think there's strides in higher education to make it a more holistic approach. So I think your experience just goes to show how necessary that kind of thing is.
I'm so happy to hear that because, yeah, it's true. At the time, and I graduated in 2012 for context. So, we're talking like over 10 years ago at this point. That was, I didn't feel that there were options that were customized enough to people's specific goals, or that kind of mix and match element, which is hilarious because that's what my company is founded on, like the customized aspect and making sure that that student teacher relationship is what it needs to be. I'm happy to hear that at Frost specifically, those changes, have been made. And hopefully, I think that's just a pain point of our education system as a whole, is that it's really founded in a Prussian system that's meant to create factory workers and not, entrepreneurial minds and the leaders of our society. So I hope that other higher ed institutions are able to implement those same changes in their respective departments, but also K through 8 I think is hopefully is going to bleed down into our younger students as well.
I
Yeah.
really do hope that this next generation of teachers are able to impart that passion and that knowledge for entrepreneurship, for thinking outside the box to the next generation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to say I think that's like Liana, the way that you describe that, I think is exactly what artists right now need to hear. And especially like so far on this podcast, we've talked a lot about independent artists and being multifaceted and trying to find different ways to be an entrepreneur and like invest in yourself and take care of yourself. Do you feel like, I mean, as an entrepreneur and an educator and as a creative, what do you feel like your strongest skill sets are?
I think as a whole, my ability to, I mean, really it's versatility. Versatility. You have to have what I call a figure outable mentality. Like everything is figure outable, whether it's you learning how to do it yourself or trusting in the overall vision of whatever you're trying to accomplish enough to invest in it, meaning hiring someone else to do pieces of it that just make sense because they might have more of a skill set than you do, or pulling in someone to build that dream with you. But you have to have a basic level of understanding in all of the different facets of whatever it is you're trying to do in order to make good decisions. And so the foundation of that is and what allows me to be confident in making those decisions that are ultimately going to lead to the success, the foundation is in being versatile and having enough of an understanding and context to move forward and make the right decision.
Absolutely. I love that. That this kind of goes hand in hand with the question that Jordi just asked you, and versatility is such a great answer for that. How did you go about beginning to develop your dreams into something that was ultimately going to be a profitable business model? Because I think one of the biggest challenges as an independent artist or even as someone in the gig economy is finding those alternative streams of revenue and really being able to succeed from that.
Yeah, I'll start with my music match because as my first business, I think my approach was very different than all of the businesses that I've built since. At the time, if I'm being totally honest, I wasn't really even thinking about the entire business structure and how it would bring in revenue or profit outside of me as a teacher. So my mentality was I left this school and all of these amazing students that I love so much, but I just knew that I couldn't sustain the level of work that I was doing in that environment, you know, semi-toxic in some ways, just in that I was completely overworking myself. And what happened was my phone started ringing. People started reaching out to me and said, I want to work with you. Can I take private lessons? Before I knew it, I had like close to 50 students in my own private studio. And it was kind of unintentional. And then I realized, well, I have to start making some choices. Like more and more people are coming and I don't have any room in my schedule. What can I do? And I felt this deep desire and responsibility to make sure that anyone who was coming my way did receive a great education. And so my solution to that problem was really, okay, who do I know? Who do I know who I trust, who's going to do a quality job and maybe even better than me for that particular student? Because, you know, this student is looking for, you know, very classical, specific, maybe even like opera technique. Well, that's not my area of expertise, right? Or someone's looking for some songwriting. Well, that's not my area of expertise. So I just kind of naturally saw this problem, had a deep desire to solve it. And that's really the core of any good business, is that there's a need for whatever it is that you're offering, whether it's a product or service. So unintentionally, I built this business by putting together a little team of teachers who I knew, trusted, who I had vetted, and then because at the time, I like to say now that I'm a recovering perfectionist, but at the time I was definitely a hardcore perfectionist. I'm like, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to really do it. And so I kind of went 0 to 100 and I'm like, well, we're going to have a scheduling system. We're going to have payment methods that are uniform instead of like, as we all know, all the musicians who might be listening, how do we accept lesson payments? At the time, imagine it was checks, cash, Venmo, Zelle, you know, just weird transfers. There's so many ways. And then what problems, does that variety cause? Well, then when you go to do your taxes, it's a hot mess. You
Mm-hmm.
can't, we're all 1099s. It's that gig economy kind of truth that we all accept as this unchangeable, like, well, that's just how it is when you're contracted to do these things or when you pull in random sources of income. But we don't have to do it that way. There are better ways to do it. And so I just decided to build this infrastructure that then became the business of my music match through the process, very organic process of solving this problem. And a lot of the little lessons that I learned along the way is, first of all, writing is the language of accountability. You can articulate whatever you need to say as clearly as, like 100% accuracy. But until it's on paper and until there's a systemized way of doing things, it's not scalable. So you have to write
Mm-hmm.
everything down. We have every single process and procedure automated, written down. It could be passed on as a manual to someone else in the event that the person who's responsible for it now is not able to do it. And that's really the backbone of a business, in my opinion, because otherwise, if the business is dependent on any one person and would not be able to continue without that person, that's not a good place to be, right? That's really dangerous. So,
Mm-hmm.
if you're thinking about creating a system, it's writing it down, creating points of automation so that you can remove any efforts or time that would have that be like an automatic process. So just to give you guys a concrete example, there's a platform called Zapier. And so what that program does is it takes any two other platforms and creates an automatic link. If someone submits this form, it creates a new row in this sheet, for example. And so when you're thinking about creating revenue or profit or these additional income streams, if you're a musician who's looking to do that, then that would be my piece of advice: is write your ideas down, create systems and processes, find ways that you can optimize that process using automations, and then everything else a human needs to do, make sure that it's as streamlined as possible and that you're really aligning all of that with your values. For example, with my music match, a core value is the human aspect of what we do. It could just be an algorithm, but as we're building in these initial stages, it was really important to me to have that face-to-face contact. So at the end of each matching quiz, the client, the potential student or parent, is automatically prompted to make a video call or a phone call so they can speak to someone. We can really get the essence of what you're looking for and ensure that that match with the teacher is the right one. Whatever that is for your business, I'm not sure, but you need to make sure that the problem that you're solving is actually being solved in the way that you want it to be. Okay, that was a long answer, but I hope it was all encompassing enough to be helpful.
Absolutely. And I just want to ask you one more question before we move into our next segment and really dig deeper about entrepreneurship. But you mentioned to me as well that you will be launching the Human Media Network pretty soon. Is this business model somewhat similar to my music match, but for visual creatives?
I'm so happy that you made that connection because yes, exactly. So Human Media Network is basically the core mission is similar to my music match in that there's this gig economy. We have all these creatives, photographers, videographers, people on production crews, from producers, directors, PAs, all kinds of people who are really just representing themselves. They're out there just hustling, making their own relationships and just picking up whatever work they can whenever they can. But sometimes it's not aligned with their actual goals or their areas of expertise. And they have to wear a lot of hats. And I think a lot of people would rather focus on the thing that they're really most passionate about and that they're really best at, and then have someone else kind of represent them and help make that match with a client who is more in line with what they're trying to accomplish professionally. So what we're doing with Human Media Network is creating this community of creatives and then matching them with brands who are really looking to take a more human approach to the production process. I think similar to the music world, the production world can be kind of brutal in that the client is just very focused on the output, on the product. So there's a lot of times very little consideration for the person who's actually providing the service. For a musician, it might be like, well, we don't think about things like, I'll give you an example. There was a client we worked with my music match, who, with the best possible intentions, wanted to have live music as part of a festival. And they had a band that was there for 5 hours straight in the middle of the day under the sun, just one like jazz combo playing for the entire festival. And I'm like, okay,
Wow.
cool. I love that you want to have music, but what if we broke it out into sets? Like, let's break it up into different bands, different time frames, so that you can have a variety of music, but also because that's kind of brutal for like one band to play such a long set. That
Without a
happens
break.
Yeah,
all the
that's
time.
insane.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I'm sure they took breaks, but still, it's like just not, there are better ways to do it. And in the
Mhm.
production industry, I think we have similar things where people just basic needs that are met in other industries are not met in this industry. People are not paid on time or consistently. And it's just okay. Like, there was a time, not to call anyone out, but you know what? Maybe you deserve to be called out. Ball and chain. There was a time when if you took a gig at Ball and Chain, you knew that you were not going to be paid for 6 months, maybe even a year down the line. And that there were
Wow.
times where those musicians had to sue the booking agent, right?
Oh
Because,
my
As they
goodness.
should.
yep,
Wow.
as they should. Exactly. That's crazy. And the same thing happens in productions. Oh, yeah, like we finished the work, but 3 months down the line, you're still waiting for your check. Or the
Yeah.
hours are absolutely insane and you're just expected to be on a set for 12 hours, or if it's a live music festival, several days in a row with very little sleep. No one's taking into consideration the fact that you're a human being who has basic needs that need to be met. So that's the goal, is that we're creating this ecosystem of human beings who are providing amazing services, and who we want to help these brand stories, who they want to help these brand stories really come to life. There's a way to achieve a high level of excellence in the quality of the work and also respect the people who are doing it.
Absolutely. I think everything that you said is so personally relatable and really important. Something that you said really stuck out to me, that basic needs are not being met in this industry for its workers. That is so greatly apparent when you're at a music venue and the green room doesn't have water or snacks, or there's not a working restroom, or there's not a private place to change or do makeup, or there's no toilet paper, or there's no air conditioning. And it's always in adding injury to insult, and not necessarily taking into account, like you said, that these are real people performing at a very high level that deserve to be compensated for it, not just financially, but also in a way that isn't detrimental to their health. Something that I've noticed about different venues in Miami, different organizers, has been a very low rate of compensation for live music, especially in public events and spaces, because a lot of times organizers don't have a huge music budget. So I myself have fronted some of the costs of performance at local festivals or interesting venues, just because I thought optically, okay, I can get content out of this. This can be mutually beneficial and interesting of a situation. But I really had to take a step back from performing at all in Miami, because I was not able to find a live band of musicians who were willing to rehearse and work and perform and travel even for such a low amount of money. I mean, I think a 5-piece band for a 3-hour set, we were given maybe $200. And it's
That's
like,
crazy.
that can maybe compensate for a drink after that very long performance. And it's like, it just didn't end up adding up. And it's sad, because live music is such a lost art in this city a lot of the time. So I'm
Yeah.
And
happy
what's
that you're kind
even
of filling that void.
I hope so. And what's even sadder is that Miami, among all of the metropolitan areas, actually has better rates than other cities. Like Boston is abysmal because of all
Mm,
the college students that are willing to play for free, or like $25 a gig. It's
hmm
it's really tough. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And there is a transition point where me, as kind of like the broker of the deal, I have to put on my teacher hat and educate that client and say, I totally understand that your resources are what they are, and I'm absolutely willing to work within your budget, but this is what you can get for that budget that's reasonable,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to meet your needs and give you the vision that you're looking for, and also still respect the people who I'm hiring. And so there's a little bit of a learning curve, and there will be an adjustment period where, for example, with a festival we worked with this year, was already an amazing upgrade to what they were able to accomplish, and they're already looking forward to next year, and they're saying, hey, well, we would love, instead of all of these duets, like, you know, these duos on both of these stages, we love the quartets or the quintets. And I'm like, I totally agree, that would be a better vibe. We have to double the budget because that's twice as many people. And they're like, oh,
Exactly.
okay, got it. It's not like the number of acts, it's like the human beings that are part of
Yeah,
those
because each
sets.
person has rent to pay.
Each mouth needs to be fed. And it's such an obvious thing. And I'm lucky to work with people who are wonderful human beings themselves. And they're like, duh, of course, we will adjust. But not everyone's like that. So, you know, all we can do is continue to be the voice for our industry, because not everyone has the courage or has the hope really in the future that this can change. So I hope anyone who's listening says, oh yeah, I need to advocate for myself and for my industry, because that's the only way that things are going to change.
Absolutely. I want to go into a quick commercial break before we move into our next segment. Hey everyone, welcome back. We are going into the next segment of the day, which is our topic of the week. This topic was chosen and curated by Liana herself. We're going to discuss a little bit more in depth entrepreneurship and having multiple passions. To go right into it, I know that you have some real estate experience as well, and this is something totally out of my realm of knowledge. And it's interesting to me that you, as a music creative, have gone into this world. So, can you explain like what advice you would give for people looking to build equity in real estate?
Sure. And just to clarify, I'm absolutely not an expert in real estate. If you take anything away from this conversation, anyone who's listening, I would say don't be afraid to explore the proven methods of building your wealth, right? When you look at how the 1% makes their money, there are just certain categories, right? Entrepreneurship, real estate is like right up there. And if I'm being honest, the only reason that I'm in it is because my now husband had this curiosity about real estate, and me, as the supportive partner that I am, I was like, okay, girl, what am I saying? Okay, boo. I will help you make that dream happen. And so really what happened was, and I want to be like fully transparent and like not gatekeep any of the little, you know, things that I've learned from this. I don't have a real estate empire, let's be clear. I have one property that is what we call house hacking. So those of you who follow me on Instagram, you saw kind of this unfold in real time because I was sharing it. But basically the idea is my husband Ben and I bought this property with our really good friend Francesca. And I think a big complaint of my generation is, as millennials and, you know, any of the younger generations, is it's just so unrealistic to buy a property these days. And that's fair. And especially in Miami, when rent and mortgages are just, you know, they skyrocketed after the pandemic and everyone wanted to move to our beautiful city. It really was daunting. Like, oh my God, am I going to be able to have that American dream of owning a home? And what I learned through this process of buying this property is, one, you need to find a good deal and know what that looks like. So as a Miami native and someone who understands the geography, the demographics, and just kind of I'm in the observational state of seeing which neighborhoods are on the up and up. So for example, the obvious one is Wynwood. 10 years ago, Wynwood
Mhm.
was, you know, warehouses, and it was like considered to be a bad neighborhood. You didn't want to go there, let alone like, you know, spend your outings there. Now, obviously, look what it's become, one of the major tourist points, and where locals go to, you know, hang out, go eat at great restaurants, experience the art and culture of our city. So you have to, from an investment perspective, you have to have that vision. And if you don't have the millions to dish out in an area that's already really been beautified. You have to have the vision of, where is the next possible wave of the city investment going to be. And so my property is right outside of Midtown. It's the area, it's called Model City, which as a Miami native, I had never heard of what Model City was. So now it's also being called West Buena Vista, which I think is super
Wait,
pretentious.
is that like by Lemon City, little outside of Little Haiti, like southwest of Mimo?
It's north of Alapata,
Okay.
west of Buena Vista, south
Mm-hmm.
of Liberty City. It's just interesting how, these neighborhoods are labeled and relabeled for appeal. Like when West Brickell became its own neighborhood, I was like, oh, please, who did that? Who named it? Like,
Yeah.
okay. So I feel like that's kind of happening to this neighborhood. But funny enough, that's actually one of the indicators that this neighborhood is going to be on the up and up, right? Is that it's being renamed to draw attention to it. So there are a lot of things that you want to consider, right, when finding a good deal. But for me, a couple things that stood out about this property. One, its proximity to our city center. It's just such an
Mm-hmm.
appealing location that's not in the middle of that Biscayne strip that's so congested with big apartment buildings. But it's just 5 minutes outside. Two, it's been renamed, and it's literally across a major avenue where the change has already happened. And unfortunately, some of that, to be transparent, some of that is gentrification, right? Some of those improvements I think are positive, and some of them that are displacing locals are obviously negative. As a Miami native, my perspective was, I'm from this city and I want to own a piece of this city. And if it means, buying it from someone who's not able to afford it and who wants to sell it, I'm going to do that. And I ended up buying it from someone who's not even from here. So I felt extra happy that I was,
Reclaiming the
reclaiming.
land. Yes, reclaiming
Exactly,
the
exactly.
territory.
Yeah, I
Exactly.
wanted
Absolutely.
to ask you a little bit more about that because I think especially, I mean, because I'm from New York and I am born and raised in Queens, and we've seen a lot of gentrification all over the city, and it's kind of been spreading out in a lot of ways, especially into certain areas of Queens and pushing out Black and brown people. So, like, how does that affect like you're like trying to go into real estate and like how you went about that? Like, what was important about that?
I think anyone who is embarking on any venture is going to have to find their balance of, you want to be ethical, right? And for me, I just, as a conscious, intentional person, I like to do things with purpose and with thought, and not just, leave a wake of accidental hurt behind me. I did have that in mind when I was looking for what I would, consider to be my ideal property as my first investment. And so I did have gentrification at the top of my mind. And when I found that the buyer was not a Miami native, and also, this neighborhood in particular that I live in is very mixed already, where there are a lot of young couples, like myself, like my husband, who are just looking to get into the real estate game, and also not even as an investment, but just to live and to stabilize their mortgage instead of be subject to these ever increasing rents that are undoubtedly going to continue in Miami. I felt like this was the right move. I'm not really an expert in this industry, and I don't know how it's affecting the city as a whole. My layman observations would be that obviously there's been a huge influx of transplants from New York, from California, because of the rise in the tech world here. And that obviously is displacing people. I remember during the pandemic, I was living in a beautiful building on Biscayne, and my rent was $3,700 a month. And during our time there, in the middle of our lease, our apartment was bought out by someone who was not from Miami, and bought it sight unseen, you guys. Like, they bought it remotely for, I think it was like 800,000, right? This apartment that was gorgeous on the water. And so we met with him, we tried to like befriend him and come up with a reasonable increase in rent that we knew was going to happen. And yeah, it wasn't reasonable. And when we left, they got 6,100 for it. And I know, imagine
That
3,700 to
took a second to
6,100.
process. That took a
Oh
second to
my
process.
God.
Oh,
It's crazy.
is that like in the Edgewater neighborhood?
Yes, exactly.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Oh my God.
And that wasn't even the highest, like of other comparable apartments in that building. There were other ones going for 8,500, 90, crazy.
Wow.
So when I say like the rate of increase was just completely
And like 200%.
exactly. It's like there for someone who is again from this city and I'm relatively successful, that change from 1 month to the next with very little preparation, there was just no other option. We had to move, right? It was just completely unreasonable. So as a person who's been displaced, I was very conscious of not doing that to someone else when I had the opportunity. And when we bought this property, it's a triplex. So it has 3 units on it. And one of the units had a tenant who had been living here for like close to 9 years and had actually undergone the same change that we had, which was the landlord had changed 2 or 3 times, but the tenant had remained constant. And he was paying significantly under market value, like less than half of what we could have gotten. But just from an ethical perspective, I said, we need to work with this person because he's been a good tenant, from what we can tell, like he's going to continue to be. And we can't just double or triple the rate and kick him out of this space. So we did that. We gave him a heads up. We met, he invited us into his home, and we were able to work out an agreement where we did increase the rent, but we installed a laundry unit for him. And to him, that was worth the value of the increase. And to us, it, was the right thing to do. And it also was the beginning of a nice, sustained relationship between landlord and tenant. So yeah, all you can do is educate yourself when you're entering a new industry and just try to do the right thing as best as you can. You can't sacrifice ultimately, like we're all just trying to survive and thrive. And you have to find that balance between doing what's best for you and, making sure that you're considerate of the human beings who you're affecting.
I think that was such a nuanced answer for a very delicate issue, because all across the board, the issue of gentrification, the housing crisis across the US, but especially in major cities like Miami and New York, it's becoming so apparent that they, as in multimillionaires or corporations, want these cities to only be for them.
Mm-hmm.
They want them to be the playgrounds of the rich and hyper successful. And it feels very damaging to the culture and the actual lifeblood of what Miami means, of the immigrants that have built this city, that have given it all of its history. So it is really amazing to me that you've been able to strike that balance between reclaiming, honestly, a bit of what is your history while also not damaging it for anyone else. So I think, being able to, as an individual, become a landlord rather than having a corporation or a conglomerate buy up all these little properties and become like a mega landlord, that is ultimately going to be the more ethical solution to the crisis than just having these few and far between corporations run out of a completely different state control the market here.
100%. And hopefully, people will have the mindset that I try to have is just, like grounding myself and not getting swept up in the greed, because when everyone starts to raise their prices, honestly, you realize, okay, I could also raise my prices. And it's this vicious cycle because the cost of living is going up. And so ultimately, when you are a landlord, you're running a business. So life is getting more expensive and you need to make more from your business to keep it up. And then everyone, it just keeps spiraling.
It trickles down in a negative way, because then if you're not able to sustain the property that you're renting out to someone else because of the cost of living, cost of repairs, and then you're not recouping that from their rent, it's like a lose-lose essentially. Yeah, wow. Currently trying to navigate that right now with renegotiating my lease. Wish me luck.
Good luck.
Yeah.
I also want to say, like, I thank you for the way that you've explained all of this, because I definitely think that people should be trying to preserve their communities while they're still like building their entrepreneurial goals. Because I think like I'm glad that you're going about it in an ethical way. And I wish that we had more of that in New York, because I feel like there are so many pockets of communities that like the artist community and like trying to build a life for themselves is also still trying to find ethical ways to do that. And it's so hard because of the housing crisis for us in particular. Like there are so many empty buildings that are owned by corporations that nobody can move into. And then our homeless population has skyrocketed, especially post COVID. So it's definitely it's giving me a lot to think on as like for what I want to do with that eventually. And like I wish that there was more ethical people trying to build that community while also building their entrepreneurship. So thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, unfortunately, Miami seems to be in a similar position, and on a similar trajectory in that, it's been predicted several times that Brickell may end up with a ton of empty apartments because the construction rate is so high and the prices are so steep that eventually the locals aren't going to be able to afford those apartments. So we'll see what happens, but ultimately it's true, the people, the conglomerates, the millionaires who are buying in bulk are going to have to make these decisions that are socially conscious, because I can only affect the people, as far as being a landlord, as far as the real estate, I can only affect my little pocket of tenants, which could be 1, 2, 5 people, maybe. Like hopefully it'll grow as I grow my portfolio, but that's so minor compared to, people who own entire buildings. So yeah, I'm not sure what needs to be done in that regard, but hopefully they become aware of the consequences of greedy behavior.
I really relate this back to the environmentalist movement, wherein a lot of the stress and responsibility of environmental impact has been placed on the consumer and the individual rather than the corporation or governmental bans on plastics or taxes for carbon emissions. It's all been placed on the individual. So the individual, such as you, as a landlord with 1 to 3 properties, you're not the problem. The problem is the people who are going in and consuming ultimately entire blocks, entire buildings. And Jordi, we were just talking about how Airbnb was recently banned in New York
Mm.
and the ramifications of that being both positive and negative. It's like you can't get a short-term rental now if your friends want to go on this vacation without having the risk of not being insured by a company like Airbnb. But at the same time, everyone trying to get into the Airbnb market was ultimately causing a major housing crisis in New York.
Right. And so what is going to take is the people who are already in those positions of power to make these changes, or for them to be regulated by the government, like you said, or for people like me who are ambitious. Hopefully, I will get to one of those seats and be able to make the influence at that higher level one day. Hopefully sooner rather than later, but one can only hope. So we put out the good vibes to the people who can make the decisions now, and also to anyone who's listening who has that fire within them, like go for it, because our world needs people with ethical perspective to be in those positions of power.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've loved this entire conversation. I want to wrap it up with one final question to you, Liana. What inspires you most as you're navigating this journey and its ups and downs?
I think, put simply, the people. I am just a big believer in potential, and it's kind of a double-edged sword, because that's definitely the teacher in me who, sees someone as like, you could do all of these things. You have this incredible capacity, you have all these gifts, but without the application of those innate skills, without the spark being lit, the fire being fanned, it doesn't become something sometimes. So that's why I choose to, in everything that I do, there's an element of teaching and learning, because I want to be the encourager of people, and ultimately people are what make the world work and move. And I just believe in human beings. And I not to quote philosophers, but there's the school of thought that human beings are innately evil, and then there's the school of thought that we're innately good. And I definitely fall in the latter category. I just think that the lives that some of us are born into ultimately, put us into this state of survival and kind of turn us into these more like animalistic creatures that are just fending for ourselves. But if we can come back to our nature, I do think that people are good, and that if we can appreciate the relationships and the connection that all of the human beings on this planet really do have, it will spark a responsibility that we have towards one another that can only lead to good things in our society and in the world as a whole. So yeah, I believe in people. I trust in people. I invest in people in the way that I encourage them and offer myself in humbly as a resource in any way that I can, from what I've learned. And I hope that that has an exponential effect on my community and on the world as a whole, in helping all of these amazing people do amazing work and affect people in their lives.
I absolutely think you're already making an incredible impact on your community. I myself have had an impact from your presence in our community, so I'm very grateful for that. Anything else that you want to give a shout out to before we wrap up this section?
I want to shout you out because I already knew you were an amazing woman and, a musician and ambitious, like I said. And I just see you making all the moves. I really admire people who take action. I think a lot of times we're held up by the what ifs or, all the things that could go wrong. But so much of what we need to learn is only going to be learned in practice. And so to watch you actually doing all these things, going on tour, writing your music, dancing, in addition to singing, like putting on a full performance, experimenting with your makeup looks and your costume, just from that musician lens, that's huge. But then on top of that, seeing you branch out and like now starting this podcast and diving into topics that are outside in some ways, the areas that you studied, but then also tapping back into your versatility. It's exciting to me to see someone who's just a little younger than me, following that track. I think the archaic idea that you start at the bottom of a ladder and just keep climbing up in one direction, it's truly outdated. We really need to be versatile. And just to throw a stat at that, the average American changes their career path at least 7 times in their lifetime. So imagine having to start from scratch every time you want to change course. Why? When we could just be in the mindset of constantly learning and adjusting and being more malleable, fluid, flexible people. That's really more in line with our nature, is to be adaptable. And I'm really, I admire that in you. I see that in you. And Jordi, I know we're just meeting now, but I'm going to keep in touch with you too. And I want to see, everything that you're creating as well. So thank you both for having me today.
Thank you so much for joining us.
I learned a lot today.
This was an excellent conversation. All right, guys, we're going to go into a quick break before our last segment. All right, we're moving into our very last segment of the show, our community corner. Here we answer questions and give advice about situations in your life. Think about us as your besties in the group chat when they actually decide to answer. All right, Jordi, do you have any questions for us today?
Yes. So I received this one anonymously. This person wanted advice on friendships. In particular, they said, how do you manage friendship with someone who is chronically lying? That's a big one.
So...
Did we have any of those?
Wow.
Maybe.
It's crazy to think about it because it's like an open secret that everyone sort of just accepts.
Yes.
Like, okay, yeah, that person just lies. It was that kind of behavior where it was like, oh, if I can get away with it here, I'll get away with it there, I'll get away with it another time.
Right.
And it doesn't just come in the form of lying about specifics. It comes in the form of fabricating additional details about things that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm. And the question is why? Like, I don't like liars. and I've never really been a liar. Okay, maybe like as a kid to my parents, like, if I was up to something. But like I feel like we are very authentic people and like seek authenticity in other people. And when it is always that other people in the group are aware that the person is lying, but there's still just enough positives to like you still have good memories with that friend. But I do think ultimately you can't trust a liar. Because
You can't.
if they're lying about small stuff, they're gonna lie about somebody else and then they're gonna lie about you.
Yeah, I actually had a roommate situation where my current roommate and I, who is one of my best friends ever, Julia, she and I lived with another individual who actively tried to say mean things about each other, like to each other, if that makes sense. So this third person would speak to me badly about Julia, and she would speak to Julia badly about me, and try to kind of get us to be mad at each other over things that were just false. And I absolutely hate that kind of behavior, not only because it's inauthentic and damaging, but also because it's just like, why? What do you possibly have to gain from making two people you're supposedly friends with hate each other? Like, you think they're both
Power.
still going to be friends with you when you're trying to make them hate each other?
Mm-hmm.
These two other people also communicate, right? So when my story wasn't adding up with Julia's story, we're like, wait a second, something's happening here. And it was just kind of like this person fabricated her own version of events for like an entire year of our lives.
Yeah. College was an interesting time. So, long story short, I feel like if you have a friend that you don't know if you can trust, just you don't need that in your life. So, protect your peace before it progresses into potentially bad things. So,
I have another question. This person also kind of wanted to know about moving on from a relationship, similar to what we talked about last week.
okay.
They said, what do you do with your ex's stuff when your relationship ends? For me,
yeah.
ooh,
You
no,
go.
you start.
Okay. This might be controversial because I know other people don't like it, and I'm a big I get a little bit nostalgic, but I use them as ways to heal with things. I keep a lot of things. I think I've kept most things from exes. I've kept like letters and pieces of clothing, and gifts and jewelry and things like that, and like still wearing them for a while. I think depending on how it ended and how you feel about them and what kind of memories and energy you feel like are still attached to these items and objects, I think that there are healthy ways to keep them and still be able to see like, oh, okay, like I cared about this person a long time ago, many moons ago, like we were in love, but like I don't feel the same, and I can have these objects, and like if they're useful and they make me happy, then I'm gonna keep using them without it having to mean anything. And I think a lot of people's partners might not like that because some people just want you to get rid of anything that could possibly remind you of an ex you want them to get rid of. But I do think depending on how the person has healed about it, I think you can keep certain things. If it's like
Yeah.
if it's like you cannot use it in any other circumstance and it's just like very clear, if it's like a picture of them, get rid of that. Get rid of it.
Yeah.
But other stuff
Yeah.
I think is fine.
I definitely agree with you. Yeah, I'm not getting rid of my Roomba. Come on. But like that relationship ended very amicably. But in that situation, like anything that was an article of clothing that I knew like would be a little triggering, that I didn't want to see anymore, that I also didn't want to just give away to Goodwill, I literally mailed it back to him along with like anything he might have forgotten at my apartment, because I had that kind of respect and mutual love that we weren't going to just like throw it away like it was trash. Because I think part of the healing process for me about a month after the breakup was to mail it back to him and be like, okay, like I'm sealing this chapter and like removing any reminders of the relationship from my apartment or my room, my space. But anything that was functional, that was a gift, that was given with good intentions, that doesn't necessarily like relate back to the person, I think it's fine to continue using and keeping those things, because ultimately it would be wasteful to not do that.
100%. Growth, healthy,
Yay.
peace.
All right, guys, that was episode 4 of the Jasmine Ortiz Show. Thank you so much for coming on and listening this week. We'll have a lot more for you guys next week.